What is money? If throughout pretty much your entire life of being consumed by the pursuit of it, you've never given much thought to the question of what it is, then today, let's right some of those wrongs. I'm sharing a short segment today from the online course New Wealth Foundations, which you can still sign up to in the show notes if you want to learn all about this stuff and then some. If you signed up to it beginning of this year, actually, it is almost like 80% different to what you would have gone through then. So even if you've already done it, I'd recommend you sign up again. To get good at investing, though, or even to get good at earning money, you should first spend a little bit of time understanding what money actually is. So let's get on to it and get started. Cheers. Hey, and welcome to Chasing the Joneses. While the world is changing, some things never change. You still need to work hard and take a few risks every now and then to achieve anything decent. But what if wealth in the future looks different? With so much uncertainty, how can we have the wealthy life today and tomorrow? In this series, I'll share views and strategies that everyday people use to build wealth. And the good news is, it doesn't come from a book. It comes from real life. Once your money thing is sorted out, on the way to chasing what you think success is, you might just learn how to surge ahead. So, if you're ready, let's go. In this portion of the course, we'd like you to take a closer look at this thing that we call money. Once you have a deeper experience with something, you are positioning yourself to start making better decisions. In fact, part of the reason why many people in the past would have struggled with money, myself included, would be because our understanding of what money was limited to a materialistic worldview. Now, part of building up your foundations is to understand and appreciate where money comes from, what it is intrinsically, and how our interaction with it can either lead us to a surplus or a deficit in our life. Now, for the purposes of this lesson, we'll assume that money is effectively a resource. It's something that we can possess, it's something that we can exchange for goods and services, and it's something that we can accumulate and store up for future use. We're obviously limited as to how far we can go into a topic inside this course, especially a topic like money, which is massive. But today I'd like to cover 3 topics inside of this money topic, and it'll be around considering your dollars as employees, what do money and gardening have in common, and finally we'll go through a condensed history lesson around what money looked like in the past, how it looks today, and what it could look like in the future. We're covering a lot of ground in this lesson, but don't worry, there's no time to make it too complicated. Now, first up, your dollars as employees. I'm not sure how many of you watching will be employees where you're working for a small to medium-sized business. Here in New Zealand, that's about 97% of all jobs are created by small to medium-sized enterprises. Or, I don't know, maybe you might be an employer. You own a small business or you own a large business and you're responsible for paying the wages of hundreds of New Zealanders below you. But as you've learned so far in this course, the amount that you earn and how diversified your income sources are when you earn it can be 2 very important things to get right in order to improve the flow of income into your household. Earning money is only the start, though. After you pay tax on the income, you'll end up spending money on what you have to do and what you want to do. My view is that often a good employee often requires a different skill set compared to a good employer. What you direct each one of your dollars to do after they're in your possession, therefore, requires a different skill set than what it took to bring them in the first place. As an employee, your focus may be on doing your work or your specific task really well, whereas the employer would focus on others doing their jobs well. One works in it, and the other one works on it. Now, what I'm trying to suggest, if it's not apparent, is that being good at making wise financial decisions involves a transition from being an earner to being an investor, just like an employee would have to transition from being where they're at to being an employer. Good employers create clear job descriptions. They make it easy for employees to perform well, And occasionally, they review and monitor their employees' performance. So being successful as an investor, well, you need to shift the focus from just earning money to managing your money. Here's why this is important. If you're making poor need versus want spending decisions, you're going to struggle to accumulate surplus leftover income consistently. If you can't create surplus money within your household, there's just no way to sugarcoat it. You're not going to be left with anything to invest in. Or what little you do have to invest, you'll be forced into taking far higher levels of risk with to multiply it. Like a good employer gives employees jobs to do based on their overall objectives of the business, you need to be prepared to give every dollar in your household a job to do. Now, this includes spending purposefully according to a budget and using some form of automation within your bank accounts to keep yourself on track. In another lesson, I'll take you through a practical example of the budgeting exercise that I recommend to my clients using a free tool that you can access today. Now, you may be energized by the idea of setting up a budget, of setting up a plan and achieving targets, or you may be more focused on the big picture and doing a budget or planning too much kind of feels too restrictive and it slows you down. Here's the thing, it doesn't matter which type of financial personality you possess, because everyone who puts the effort into a budget, without exception, ends up getting more dollars working for them to achieve the objectives of the household. All right, but moving on from the employee-employer analogy now, let's hit the garden to look at another framework for considering what money is and how you can manage it. Now, don't worry if you're not into gardening, but just consider these three things to start with: seed, time, and harvest. If you can picture your financial life as a garden, each after-tax dollar that you've earned is effectively like a seed. You could just snack on the seeds. You could consume the fruit that contains the seeds as soon as you can. But what if, instead of consuming what you have when you get it, you instead plant it? Hopefully this isn't too much of a leap, but as you can see, money is a resource that has a lot in common with seeds, in that it can actually multiply and spawn, much like germinating seeds create a plant which produces fruit that converts to seed, which can then create new life again. From just one tomato plant seed, for example, you can create an entire army of tomatoes, and trust me, I know this. Like any form of gardening though, especially when you're new to it at first, it's a bit of a gamble. It's an unknown. And you've seen maybe others do it well, but you've not had any direct experience with it yet. Maybe there's not enough rain when you try it out. Maybe the birds and the pests are constantly stealing your seed. Or maybe the weather takes a turn for the worse and destroys your crop right before the harvest. Things can go wrong, right? Planting your seed contains risk that you may not get a harvest, just like investing your dollars is a risk that you might not get a return. Now, both gardening and investing require this thing called faith. And faith isn't something that we talk about much these days. You have to believe that your actions are correct with faith, even without immediate evidence to back it up. That's what investing and gardening have in common. In fact, this is where a lot of investors get stuck when they're just starting out. Investing sounds awesome through the glowing testimonials of others who've gone before you and put a post up on Facebook bragging about how well they've done within a short period of time. But stories of success always travel around far faster than the stories of trial, endurance, sacrifice, and self-doubt. Planting your seed feels like you're literally giving away or burying some of your treasure and trusting in a process that you might not have any consistent results with, at least initially. The good news is, with each season, it becomes more about the gardener and less about the garden. Same thing with investing. Really good gardeners not only plant well, but they wait well. And even when there's fruit, they let it convert to more seed. Then they plant their excess for another harvest. And then they do it again. They're compounding their returns as they consistently defer immediate gratification for a longer-term return. Money is a resource that can grow through the pattern of continual planting. A good garden, like a good investment portfolio, will contain seeds bearing fruit for consumption throughout different seasons of your life and for future growth. Different seeds produce different plants, which will do well in different environments. That's diversification. I can go on all day with a gardening analogy. It's great. But the critical thing to take away from this gardening analogy is seed, time, and harvest. Getting the seed or earning is the first step. Planting the seed or investing is the next step. This requires time. It's all in the name of the harvest, though, or the culmination of the reward from all of your sacrifice of both financial resource and time. You should start all ventures like investing with the end in mind. And at the end of the garden, you've lived a life where you've grown all the resource that you've needed to live the good life and hopefully share a resource with those around you too. Now that we've covered dollars as employees and dollars as seeds, let's take a closer look at what money was, is, and is to come. Now, initially we had a barter system. We traded items that we had a surplus in for items that we had a deficit in. Now, consider the caveman trading elephant meat for, say, weapons or something like that. So long as you had an excess of what others required at the time, you would more often than not prosper relative to others. An inevitable weakness of the barter system, though, is that it's unlikely that all the participants will have the exact types of goods or services that are in demand at any one point in time. But over time, people needed a universally accepted item of value to trade with because what one person wants and needs aren't often lined up with what others have to offer. So there was a need for a medium of exchange, and there was a need to ensure that the form that it took was divisible. After all, a live ox would be worth far more than just one chicken, right? So how could people who had an unequal item trade with each other? So along came precious metals like gold and silver. This is a silver coin right here. It's a physical piece of metal, which became a sort of in-between thing that could be traded instead of the actual goods themselves. And when people figured out that there was a common material that had a wide network of people who demanded it, like precious metals, well, then the metals alone became the item of value. And this was because of the power that it had to be traded for goods and services that were required. So money came about as we needed a divisible medium of exchange to allow trade of unequal things to occur. And as money further evolved, we were introduced to the concept that money could also be stored up. And if the money was in exchange for things right away, it could be accumulated for future use, or it could be used as a way to formalize a type of economy, which ultimately led to prosperity being more equally distributed across people groups. And that's kind of when things started to get quite interesting in the world. So moving forward through history, as trade with individuals evolved into nations trading with nations, the volume of goods traveling over the ocean became so large that the exchange of precious metals of payment was actually just too risky. Sinking ships, pirates, wars, you name it, money required another evolution. So simplistically, of course, banks were born when a need arose for a type of certificate that gave the bearer or holder the right to exchange it for actual gold or silver. Now, these bank notes became a substitute for the metal itself. So long as there was faith in the issuer of the note or currency, the money or dollars became as good as the claim that it represented. Eventually, governments of nations, through their military might, became the backers of this currency. This is where we have the term fiat currency. It's money because the nation state says that it's money. Much like the first banknotes were redeemable for gold, today, nation state fiat currency like the yen, the Australian dollar, or the Kiwi dollar can all be redeemable for the US dollar. Now, why the US dollar? Well, simply put, they've got the biggest army, and that's pretty much the truth of it. Now, I appreciate that this has been a long lesson today. Because you're investing seed today, which will be harvested tomorrow, though, I want you to consider the future of money before we wrap this lesson up. Now, in 2008, we saw the invention of Bitcoin, which according to the earliest transaction recorded, was worth 0.0009 cents each. Crazy. Now, the fact that at the time of recording is now worth around $35,000 each tells us that perhaps money might be evolving in anticipation of a changing world. Now, much like precious metals like this silver coin would be considered relatively scarce in the analog natural world, for the first time ever using something called blockchain technology, it's now possible for participants in the Bitcoin network to own something considered scarce in the digital world. Now, understanding where this all goes is well beyond the scope of this course, but what's important for you to take away from this is that money in the future may look different than what it does today. For this reason, when we're trying to give each of our dollars a job to do, and when we're deciding whether or not we consume or invest, well, we have to be open-minded about what money is or what money will be, maybe, in the future. But to sum it all up, your dollars are far more than mere banknotes or a balance in your banking app. They're employees governed by an employment contract or a budget. And they're seeds in a financial garden that you can choose to plant or consume. How you manage them, which is your strategy, involves patience and maybe occasionally risk-taking. And that'll shape your current state, but also your future state. Now you know what money is, what it's like, using a couple of different analogies, and what it might be like in the future. Hopefully you've enjoyed that lesson. If you have anything to add or any other questions, please do feel free to jump into the comments below this lesson and fire away. Let me have it. All right, we'll catch you on the next lesson.